The Selkirk Mountains touch the sky at over 11,000 feet in southeastern British Columbia, Canada. Encircled by the Columbia River and dressed in a richly forested garment, the sheer jagged peaks produce an aura of beauty and danger. Deep within the heart of these mountains, a transcontinental rail line passes through the longest railway tunnel in the Western Hemisphere. This is Canadian Pacific's route over Rogers Pass. Join 7 Idea Productions as we explore the mountain sub beginning in Revelstoke along the Columbia River and continuing east to Field at the foot of the Continental Divide. The mountain sub lives up to its name with stiff grades of 2.4%. You'll see trains burrowing under active avalanche zones. And beneath the summit of the Selkirks through 2 different tunnels. The 5-mile-long Connaught Tunnel and the 9.1-mile Mount Macdonald Tunnel, the longest in North America. Part of CP's 3,000-mile transcontinental line from Montreal to Vancouver, the mountain sub sees high-priority intermodal trains running both east and west. Unit grain trains, 152-car coal trains out of Crow's Nest Pass, monster 170-car potash trains weighing over 20,000 tons, and Canada's premier passenger train, the Rocky Mountaineer. A combination of fantastic Canadian scenery and hard-working trains is what this program is all about. Join us now for Rogers Pass, Canadian Pacific's mountain sub. Today we are in beautiful British Columbia as we go trackside along the mountain sub. Although Field is milepost 0.0 on the timetable, we will be traveling west to east, beginning at Revelstoke, which is milepost 125.7. The grade over Rogers Pass starts immediately as the railway follows the Illecillewaet River through Greely, Twin Butte, Loretta, Albert Canyon, Downey, Illecillewaet, Flat Creek, and Ross Peak. From here, the railway splits into 2 different grades over the summit. The eastbound Connaught track continues up the hill to Glacier, reaching the summit at an elevation of 3,745 feet, just inside the west bore of the 5-mile-long Connaught Tunnel. Opened in 1916, it runs directly underneath Mount Macdonald. From there, it's a 2.4% downhill grade through Stoney Creek and Griffith before again joining the westbound track at Fraine. The westbound Macdonald track was built in 1988 to ease the climb over the east side of Rogers Pass from 2.4% to 1%. It heads through Wakely and Bear Creek before disappearing through the 9.1-mile-long Mount Macdonald Tunnel, passing 300 feet beneath the older Connaught Tunnel, and emerging again at Macdonald on the west side of the pass. The summit on the Macdonald track is 3,462 feet, 283 feet lower than the Connaught grade. Continuing east, we head through Rogers, where trains get a short reprieve from the mountain grade while passing the stations at Beavermouth, Redgrave, Donald, Jansens, Forde, Moberly, and KC Junction, where the Windermere sub heads south toward the coal fields of Crow's Nest Pass. At Golden, the line changes course, following the Kicking Horse River east on a 2.2% climb through Glenogle and Palliser before reaching the top of the grade at Leanchoil. Trains then experience faster running to Ottertail before slowing once again as they approach the crew change point at Field. Our tour of the mountain sub begins along the banks of the Columbia River at Revelstoke, BC. Originally called Big Eddy and second crossing by railway surveyors, Revelstoke lies between the Montreal Mountains to the west and the Selkirks to the east. This fantastic view is from Mount Revelstoke, which is part of the Selkirk Range we will be traveling through. The Canadian Pacific crosses the Columbia River into town between the Big Eddy Bridge and the Trans-Canada Highway. Our first train of the day is seen approaching from the west. It has just crossed Eagle Pass on CP's Shuswap subdivision, which runs 128.5 rail miles west to Kamloops on the transcontinental mainline. Although the metric system has become more common throughout Canada since the 1970s, it isn't used universally. Canadian railways are a great example, as they continue to use imperial units of measurement for train length, capacity, speed, and trackage distance. As we travel along the mountain sub today, you will see that we refer to stations at the respective mileposts, and siding lengths are marked off in feet, just as they are done in the U.S. That being said, we can assure you that we drove several hundred kilometers back and forth along the Trans-Canada Highway while covering the 126 miles of track between Revelstoke and Field. The train rolls into Revelstoke, where it'll pause for a crew change before tackling the stiff grades of Rogers Pass. At an elevation of 1,570 feet, Revelstoke marks the lowest point on CP's mountain sub. Here, the Columbia River flows south toward the U.S. border after rounding the north edge of the Selkirk Mountains. This easy water level route was considered by the Canadian Pacific, but later rejected for a shorter, more difficult climb over what became Rogers Pass. CP 9812 leads an eastbound stack train over the 1,122-foot Columbia River Bridge. The CPR arrived in Revelstoke in 1885. Railway surveyors referred to this location as the second crossing of the Columbia. The first crossing is located on the other side of the Selkirks at Donald. A remote-controlled locomotive brings up the rear of the stack train as the head end approaches the yard. Upon entering town, the main line passes the Revelstoke Railway Museum, with a nice selection of vintage railway equipment. The museum is located at station sign Farwell, which is milepost 1.5 on the Shuswap sub. We are just west of the yard and a dwarf signal shows a clear block for another eastbound. CP 8854 is on the point of an empty grain train as it approaches the yard at Revelstoke. Revelstoke is a division point between the Shuswap and Mountain subs and serves as a crew change point. It is also a maintenance of way base. A Jordan spreader and wedge plow are stationed nearby, getting a seasonal break from their winter snow fighting duties. We relocate to the east end of the yard to catch the CP 8854 as it begins its run over the Mountain sub with a fresh crew. As the train departs Revelstoke, it has already begun its 40-mile, 2,175-foot climb up the west side of the Selkirk Mountains. Our ascent up infamous Rogers Pass is underway. The first 24 miles out of Revelstoke is double-tracked with crossovers at White, Greely, Twin Butte, Loretta, and Albert Canyon. Greely is milepost 119.9 on the Mountain sub. CP 8897 East heads up the hill on the north track. This empty coal train is returning to the Crow's Nest coal fields from the Roberts Bank Export Terminal near Vancouver. These trains typically consist of 152 cars and have an additional remote-controlled locomotive in both the middle and rear of the train. sun hides behind afternoon clouds as the train continues up the grade. 30 minutes later, a westbound double-stack train led by CP 9369 drops down through Greely on a late afternoon in June. Continuing up the line toward Albert Canyon, we catch the westbound Rocky Mountaineer running along the Illecillewaet River on today's journey between Banff and Kamloops. The Rocky Mountaineer is a private Canadian tour company operating over rail lines in British Columbia and Alberta. The trains run during the summer months and are a great way to experience the beauty of Western Canada. Established in 1990 and based in Vancouver, BC, it has become one of the top train rides in the world. The double-track main line passes through a cut, bypassing an old abandoned tunnel which can still be seen from this location. Albert Canyon marks the beginning of the stiff 2.2% grade to the summit at Glacier on the Connaught track. A westbound loaded grain train eases downhill just west of Albert Canyon. The railway follows the course of the Illecillewaet River up the western slope of the Selkirk Mountains, crossing it 10 times. The siding of Illecillewaet is accessed by Jumping Creek Road, just off the Trans-Canada Highway. While waiting for a train, a couple of black bears amble up toward our location. Spring has come to the Selkirks, and the bears are eager to replace the pounds lost during winter's hibernation. While the male keeps a watchful eye on us, the female seems preoccupied with feasting on the large dandelions which grow here. Bears are unpredictable in their behavior and dangerous and are best left alone. Fortunately for us, dandelions trumped rail fans for this couple, who decided to swing wide and head for the other side of the tracks. Illecillewaet is a siding that crosses the river on a 190-foot-long bridge located at milepost 97.8. An empty grain train heads up the hill with an interesting assortment of power. GE AC44CW number 8623 leads an XSU SD40-2 number 6611. The third unit is a former GP9, rebuilt in 2013 as a GP20C Eco number 2233. A nearly perfectly timed meet is taking place, and CP8623 East slowly pulls through the siding toward the east switch, while a westbound coal train heads down grade on the main track. The grain train was too long for the 9,936-foot siding, so the coal drag comes to a stop until the last car of the eastbound is clear of the switch. The Mountain Sub RTC in Calgary bends both east and west switches at Illecillewaet, and the trains are soon on their way. RTC is short for Rail Traffic Controller and is the same as a train dispatcher in the U.S. Just up the grade from Illecillewaet, the railway enters a high-risk area for avalanches during the winter months. The Laurie Snowsheds and tunnels protect the main line at milepost 96. The westbound Rocky Mountaineer exits the snowsheds with the whine of the 3 EMD's dynamic brake fans attesting to the heavy 2.2% descending grade. Rogers Pass is named for Major A.B. Rogers, who discovered this shortcut across the Big Bend of the Columbia River between Revelstoke and Donald in 1881. This narrow valley through heavily forested mountains follows the Illecillewaet River on the west side and the Beaver River on the east. The Trans-Canada Highway was completed through the pass in 1962, and like the railway, uses snow sheds where the grade cuts through the avalanche chutes. Highway 1 clings to the north side of the valley, and the CP navigates the south. A tie gang is busy working up the hill toward Ross Peak, and we watch as a tamper heads through the 1,160-foot concrete shed before disappearing into Laurie Tunnel 2. Between tunnels 2 and 1, we get a brief glimpse of the line as it burrows directly under the slide zone. The RTC has informed the tie gang to clear up for the day. CP has several eastbound trains that need to get over the hill, and several westbounds are coming out of Field. It's going to be a busy afternoon on Rogers Pass. Soon, CP 9606 East enters the snow sheds with an eastbound grain empty. The train exits Tunnel 1, and we see a yellow over green signal just ahead. The train crew calls out the signal on the radio.
E96 knot 6 east, clear to medium to Flat Creek. Out.
A radio-controlled AC-44CW shoves on the rear of the train. A high, wide, and dragging equipment detector is located near Flat Creek, milepost 95.1. CP 8743 stomps up the grade with an empty Roberts Bank coal train, heading for Golden, BC. Take a look at the second unit as it passes by. It's a refurbished SD30C Eco. It spent its former life as an SD40-2. A GE ES44AC approaches, working as a mid-train remote. A second remote-controlled ES44AC passes the detector, and we hear the computer-generated report of the train.
CP detector, mile 95.1, mountain sub 9 degrees, axle 632, no alarms.
Our climb continues into the Selkirk Mountains on a late September afternoon. A splash of fall colors brightens up the scene near the west end of another series of snow sheds, beginning at milepost 94.4. CP 9732 West crosses the Illecillewaet on a short bridge as it carefully descends the steep 2.5% grade. The train crosses the river again as it continues down the hill. A few minutes later, a second westbound exits the 300-foot shed. CP 9818 leads a 170-car Canpotex potash train down the heavy grade. A leased Union Pacific locomotive number 5527 assists the train, adding dynamic braking for the downhill run. The name Canpotex is short for Canadian Potash Exporters, which is based in Saskatchewan. Potash is used primarily in fertilizer and is shipped around the globe from Vancouver, BC, as well as Portland, Oregon. Canpotex is the world's largest exporter of potash, and these massive trains are seen daily over the mountain sub. Brake shoes squeal and dynamic brake fans whine as the heavy train is carefully brought down the stiff 2.5% grade. Here, the mountain sub lives up to its name. The west bore of the Mount Macdonald Tunnel comes into view as we set up near Ross Peak. A late September rainstorm is rolling over the Selkirks this morning and is forecast to drop over an inch of rain before noon. CP 8708 East leads an empty coal train up the wet rails of the South Track, which is now referred to as the Connaught Track, and the engineer gives us a friendly whistle. Between Flat Creek and Rogers, the line is again double-tracked, and the grades split as they cross the summit of Rogers Pass. Eastbounds like this coal train generally take the older Connaught Track, which crests the summit near Glacier, around 4 miles farther up the mountain, and westbounds take the newer Macdonald Track, using the nearby tunnel. Ross Peak looms above both main lines near the west bore of the Mount Macdonald Tunnel, and an avalanche chute still contains a trace of snow on a springtime afternoon in June. Looking to the east above the Connaught Track, the craggy summit of Rogers Pass is finally in sight, draped in the evidence of recent storms. The Mount Macdonald Tunnel yawns before us, and we can hear a westbound grinding up to the summit, which is located just inside the tunnel portal. At 9.1 miles, this is the longest tunnel in the Western Hemisphere. Trains can be heard for over 20 minutes before reaching daylight. CP 9359 leads a westbound train 101 out of the tunnel. CP 8630 East heads up the Connaught Track, with train 112 running between Vancouver and Montreal. The Macdonald Tunnel was built in 1988 to reduce the grade on the east side of the pass from 2.4% to 1% for heavy westbound trains. Eastbounds, which are usually empty, take the steeper Connaught grade. Another westbound is heard in the tunnel. As it exits the portal, it reaches the top of the climb out of the Beaver Valley. Continuing up the Connaught track, Avalanche Mountain looms over Glacier Station, which was built at this location in 1916 when the Connaught Tunnel was completed. The building is currently in a state of ruin and is one of only 2 remaining log stations in Canada. The other is Lake Louise in Alberta. The Rocky Mountaineer approaches the station after exiting the 5-mile Connaught Tunnel, just around the curve. Although normally used for eastbounds, the Mountaineer prefers this track on its westbound run. The steeper grade is also the most scenic. A high green shows at the east end of Glacier for the CP 8743 as it lugs an empty coal train to the summit of Rogers Pass at an elevation of 3,745 feet. Just like on the Macdonald track, the summit is actually just inside the west bore of the tunnel. A work train sits on a house track near the station as the rear of the coal drag disappears into the Connaught Tunnel just out of view. At an elevation of 4,360 feet, we have reached the summit of Rogers Pass. At this point, the Connaught Tunnel is nearly 800 feet below us, and the Mount Macdonald Tunnel is over 1,000 feet down. Rogers Pass is known for its snowfall. The original 1885 rail line ran over this pass as well, but several deadly avalanches led to the building of the Connaught Tunnel. Today, the Trans-Canada Highway travels close to the original route. A series of snowsheds add protection in the highest prone areas, while the Royal Canadian Artillery uses 105mm howitzers for avalanche control during the winter months. One of the remnants of the original line over Rogers Pass can be found at Loop Brook, near Glacier. A column of stone pillars still rise through the trees where the old grade forded the creek. A series of loops near this location eased the grade over the pass until the Connaught Tunnel was opened in December of 1916. Even today, although their beauty is alluring, the foreboding mountains that mark the top of the Selkirks stand like a giant keep-out sign. The Connaught Tunnel was the longest in Canada when it was built, and allowed the CP to breach the Selkirks directly underneath Mount Macdonald. It lowered the crossing of Rogers Pass by over 500 feet. The grade inside the tunnel is 0.95%. The rails shimmer at the east bore as the Rocky Mountaineer prepares to exit the 5 miles of darkness. Farther down the mountain, we find the east bore of the Mount Macdonald Tunnel. The station sign is Bear Creek, and we can see that the name fits. Another black bear forages for food along the right-of-way on a rainy afternoon. Black bears are a common sight in British Columbia, as are grizzlies. An alarm sounds as a door is raised near the end of the purge cycle. Large fans are used to clear the tunnel of smoke in between trains. A westbound train is in the tunnel, and another westbound is being held at Wakely for the purge to complete. The bear doesn't seem to be bothered by the sounds of the tunnel, and we suspect that he spends a lot of time in the area. We are actually set up right where he was just a few minutes earlier. Returning our attention to the tunnel, smoke begins flowing out of the east bore near the end of the purge. Soon, the searchlight signal shows a green for the second westbound. CP 9808 leads a loaded grain train up the 1% grade and disappears into the longest tunnel in North America. It's a 35-minute trip under Mount Macdonald to the west side of Rogers Pass on a 0.7% grade. At one point, the Mount Macdonald Tunnel crosses nearly 300 feet under the Connaught Tunnel, as both lines pass directly through the heart of Mount Macdonald. Just down from the Mount Macdonald Tunnel, a powerhouse is located next to the right-of-way. It is used for the ventilation system on the mile-long Mount Shaughnessy Tunnel, which was built as part of the $500 million 21-mile Macdonald track. A loaded coal train exits the west bore of the tunnel as it climbs the 1% grade. Another rebuilt SD30C Eco is tucked in behind the lead unit. The Mount Shaughnessy Tunnel crosses under the Trans-Canada Highway, and if you look carefully, you can see traffic passing overhead. Mount Rogers towers over the east side of the pass above Stoney Creek. Both the Connaught and Macdonald tracks cross over the creek on impressive bridges, but sadly, access has been restricted in recent years due to vandalism. From the Trans-Canada Highway, we can make out the lower bridge used by the Macdonald track, or Mac track as it is called by the railway. A work train backs down the grade toward the siding at Wakely to clear up for a westbound grain train. Before the Macdonald track was opened in 1988, westbounds had to contend with a stiff 2.4% climb, requiring manned helpers out of Rogers. Today, westbounds have a much easier climb with no additional power needed. Both grades cut through Glacier National Park and are mostly hidden from view as they descend into the Beaver Valley. Through a tiny hole in the trees, we get a glimpse of the bridges over Mountain Creek near milepost 70.8 as an eastbound stag train glides down the Connaught track. If you look carefully, you can just make out the second bridge below it. The mountains above the Beaver River are dressed in a new blanket of snow, showing off some of the beauty of eastern British Columbia. We take a moment to view our surroundings high above the canyon as the sun prepares to disappear behind the Selkirks. As we continue east, the scenic vistas we will encounter are alone worth the visit. Returning to trackside, we are set up at Fraine, which is milepost 68.3 on the mountain sub. Here, the two tracks come back together near the bottom of the pass. The signals directly above us are numbered 684C, the C referring to the Connaught track, and guard the crossovers here. An eastbound grain train is heard coming down the hill, and we set up to get this shot as it reaches the bottom of the heavy grade. Crossing to the other side of the Beaver River, a westbound potash train heads through Fraine on the Mac track. This is the same train we saw near Flat Creek on the west side of the pass. The train begins to slow as it starts to feel the effect of the grade. Although the climb is no more than 1%, keep in mind that this unit train consists of 170 cars and weighs upwards of 23,000 tons. The four big GEs have their hands full with this 8,200-foot-long train. The rails sing as the tail end remote shoves the rear of the heavy train up the mountain. Peering down into Beaver Canyon, a westbound grain train passes Station Rogers at the bottom of the pass. Before the completion of the Macdonald track in 1988, manned helpers were added to heavy westbound trains here for the 2.4% climb over Rogers Pass. Now, trains roll right through without stopping. These signals guard the east approach to Fraine. Signal 683M on the left governs the Macdonald track and changes aspect from flashing yellow to clear for another westbound. We watch as CP 9719 leads a potash train up the grade. The track in the foreground is the former helper pocket at Rogers. Continuing east of Rogers, the line goes back to single track with sidings. The Beaver River empties into the Columbia near a siding known as Beavermouth. Here, the river is part of a reservoir known as Kinbasket Lake, formed when the Mica Dam was built north of Revelstoke in 1973. The westbound Rocky Mountaineer rolls through Beavermouth on a sunny afternoon. Eastbound double stacks appear out of Beaver Canyon behind CP 9812. At Donald, the Columbia River flows compass north through the Rocky Mountain Trench at a place railroad surveyors called the first crossing of the river. An eastbound empty coal train heads over the bridge. Climbing up to track level, the work train we first saw at Glacier Station rounds a curve and crosses the bridge, which is hidden from view from this angle. Double track begins again at Donald and continues east to Golden. This was originally a staging area and work camp during the construction of the Rogers Pass line. The remains of a sawmill still stand at this location, which was also once the headquarters of a logging railroad operated by the Columbia River Lumber Company. CP 8751 East leads a manifest train past the old mill site on the south track. The second unit is an EMD SD40-2 with a classic CPR Pac-Man emblem. The grade is basically flat as trains travel through the Rocky Mountain Trench to Golden. A westbound coal train sprints through Jansens at dusk. Just to the east, a headlight pierces the coming darkness as a westbound stack train passes the signals at milepost 47.6. Forde is milepost 45.3. A thick fog has rolled in as another westbound stack train passes on the north track. The fog persists at Moberly near milepost 40.3. A westbound potash train gets to stretch its legs for a few miles before beginning its assault on Rogers Pass. Eastbound double stacks approach Casey Junction, just west of Golden. Casey Junction is where the Windermere subdivision joins the mountain sub. This is the route coal trains take to access Crow's Nest Pass. An eastbound 10,000-foot Vancouver to Toronto double-stack train races through Casey Junction in the early morning. The letters KC and KC Junction refer to the Kootenay Central Railway, which was the charter to build the rail line south from Golden. Today's Windermere sub heads 145 miles south to Fort Steele through the scenic Columbia River Valley. A westbound grain train has just been refueled at Golden, known on the timetable as Hill. The second unit is a classic, a GMD SD40-2F, affectionately nicknamed a Red Barn. This is one of only 25 wide-body cowl units built for CP, many of which have recently been rebuilt as SD30Cs, so we find this a real treat. Twilight settles in around Golden as another day of rail fanning comes to a close. The next morning, our surroundings are again shrouded in a thick layer of fog as a westbound slowly approaches the west end of Hill. The train will be stopping to take on fuel before tackling Rogers Pass. Since no fuel facility exists in Golden, diesel is brought to the train by truck. When a westbound train leaves field, the crew gives the RTC the fuel readings of each locomotive in the consist. If fuel is needed, a truck is called to meet the train here. Both lead locomotives on this train were getting low, so 2 trucks were called out, and both engines are fueled at the same time to minimize delays. The fueling process can become a bottleneck when traffic is heavy. Golden is nestled in the Rocky Mountain Trench, which is a large valley in the northern Rockies, stretching from Flathead Lake, Montana, to just below the Yukon border in northern BC. The trench separates the Rocky Mountains to the east from the Columbia Mountains to the west, including the Selkirks. Golden's history is tied to the Canadian Pacific and logging, and is situated at the confluence of the Kicking Horse and Columbia rivers. The Kicking Horse is a glacial-fed river, and its milky color can easily be seen mixing with the green of the Columbia. From the top of Mount 7, we get a fantastic view of the area, including CP's coal train servicing facility and yard. Sitting on over 40 acres, the staging yard can handle up to 9 unit trains, which run down the Columbia Valley to the coal mines in southeastern BC. Golden marks where the transcontinental line turns east to follow the Kicking Horse River to Field, and then up the Continental Divide and into Alberta. From the bank of the Kicking Horse River, the westbound train 101 from Toronto to Vancouver exits the Kicking Horse Canyon and past the signals at East Hill on a sunny afternoon. The train slowly exits the canyon, which includes a 2% descending grade winding through the bottom of the narrow chasm. Peering down into the canyon, the railway crosses the Kicking Horse on Bridge 6 and into a tunnel at milepost 31.4. An eastbound makes its way up through the canyon. Thimbleberry leaves begin to take on the shades of autumn along the Kicking Horse River at Glenogle, milepost 28. Several derailed centerbeam cars decorate the 9,000-foot siding. These empty cars can run the risk of string-lining on curves if not handled properly, especially on a 2% mountain grade. CP357 approaches with loads of grain bound for New Westminster. The railway continues to climb as it heads east through the Kicking Horse Canyon. Palliser is a 9,032-foot siding at milepost 22.4. A sawmill existed here from 1886 to 1908, and today it is a nice quiet place to picnic along the river. From a bluff overlooking the scene, an eastbound stack train climbs the 2% grade, crossing the Kicking Horse River Bridge 4, located at milepost 21.5. The rear of the train crosses the river before disappearing into the nearby Palliser Tunnel, just out of view. As the rails continue east, the majestic Rocky Mountains begin to show themselves. Visitors find them ruggedly beautiful and wildly scenic. To those who built Canada's transcontinental railroad, they were the ultimate challenge to overcome if they were to dare to breach the Continental Divide. CP 9764 East climbs a grade at Beaverfoot Crossing, just below the top of the hill at Leanchoil. mountain sub continues to follow the course of the Kicking Horse River to Field. Between Leanchoil and Ottertail, another westbound grain train heads for Golden, where it will take on fuel before scaling Rogers Pass. Mount Heard towers over the Kicking Horse River at a bend near Porcupine Creek. Another westbound grain train breaks the silence as it passes by. Fog lingers in the mountains above Ottertail as the first rays of the day touch the summits. Below us, the cool milky waters of the Kicking Horse flow west toward the Columbia and eventually into the Pacific Ocean, nearly 1,000 miles away. An early morning grain train crosses the river at milepost 9.2. We have finally made it to Field, the eastern end of the mountain sub. The signals are red at the west switch as the eastbound Rocky Mountaineer appears from under the Trans-Canada Highway. The train will soon be treating its passengers to scenic Kicking Horse Pass as they head for the day's destination of Banff, Alberta. Field is located in the Kicking Horse River Valley in Yoho National Park and is a division point on the CP with a Lagan sub continuing east to Calgary. A fresh crew has just boarded this westbound manifest train and they begin their day's run to Revelstoke. Field was established in 1884 with the building of the Canadian Pacific Railway. It was also a helper station to assist trains climbing the Big Hill immediately east of town. Our final train of the day arrives at Field for a crew change after completing its run over Rogers Pass. Mount Stephen makes an incredible backdrop for the small railroad town of roughly 170 people. Trains stop here just long enough to change crews before continuing on. A Revelstoke crew has brought this train to Field, and a fresh Calgary crew will take it east over the Lagan sub. The shadows are growing long as the train gets underway, ready for the steep climb over legendary Kicking Horse Pass. But that's an adventure for another day. Until next time, thanks for watching.